In today's video, we're diving into the shocking story of a man who fell for a scam by someone pretending to be from Microsoft. Stay with us till the end to learn how to protect yourself from these fraudsters and what steps to take if you've already been scammed. For privacy reasons, all names and details have been changed. Every scammer must be held accountable. I'm Walter Thompson, 72 years old, living in a modest house on the outskirts of Columbus, Ohio. My life has been quiet since my wife, Ellen, passed 5 years ago. The days blend into one another. Mornings with coffee and the newspaper, afternoons tending to my small garden, and evenings with reruns of old westerns. My computer, a clunky Dell desktop I've had for nearly a decade, is my window to the world. I use it to check emails, read about local events, and occasionally video call my son, David, who lives in Chicago with his wife and 2 kids. I'm not what you'd call tech-savvy, but I get by. Or so I thought. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of gray, unremarkable day that makes you want to stay inside. I was sipping my second cup of coffee when the phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number, but I picked up anyway. "Hello, this is Walter," I said, my voice raspy from disuse. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," came a voice on the other end, polite but with a noticeable accent. Indian, maybe, or something close. "This is James from Microsoft Technical Support. We've detected a serious virus on your computer. It's compromising your system as we speak." I froze, the coffee mug halfway to my lips. A virus? I didn't know much about computers, but I'd heard horror stories about hackers and malware. A virus? How did that happen? I asked, setting the mug down. "It's very common, sir," the man, James, said smoothly. "Hackers target systems like yours to steal personal information. But don't worry, we can fix it. I'll guide you through the process to install a trusted antivirus program." His accent was thick, but I didn't think much of it. I'd read somewhere that tech companies often had support teams overseas. Besides, he sounded professional, quoting technical terms I didn't understand: firewalls, malware, encryption breaches. My gut told me to trust him. After all, he was from Microsoft, or so he claimed. I didn't even consider that someone could fake that. "All right," I said, hesitant but worried about this so-called virus. "What do I need to do?" James instructed me to open my browser and visit a website. The URL was long and complicated, nothing like the clean Microsoft.com I expected, but he assured me it was a secure partner site. I followed his steps, clicking through prompts to download a program called SecureGuard 360. He stayed on the phone, patient and encouraging, as the software installed. A bright blue icon appeared on my desktop, and a window popped up, scanning my system with a progress bar that ticked along reassuringly. "See, sir, it's already detecting threats," James said. "You're doing the right thing." The scan finished, and James had me enter some details: my name, email, and, at one point, my bank account information to verify my identity for the software license. I hesitated there. "Why do you need my bank details?" I asked. "It's standard procedure, Mr. Thompson," he replied, his tone calm. "We need to ensure the software is registered to you. It's completely secure." I wasn't entirely convinced, but the thought of a virus stealing my data pushed me forward. I typed in my account number and routing information, the same ones I used for my Social Security deposits and bill payments. The call lasted nearly an hour, and by the end, James thanked me for my cooperation and assured me my computer was now fully protected. I hung up, feeling a mix of relief and unease. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something about the call nagged at me: the accent, the complicated website, the request for my bank details. But I pushed it aside. I'd done what Microsoft told me to do. Surely I was safe. The next morning, everything changed. I logged into my bank account online to check my balance, a habit I'd kept since Ellen used to handle our finances. My heart sank as the page loaded. My checking account, which should have had $42,000, my life savings, built from years of careful budgeting, was at zero. My savings account, another $15,000, was empty too. I refreshed the page, thinking it was a glitch. Nothing changed. My hands shook as I grabbed the phone and called the bank. "Mr. Thompson," the bank representative said after a long hold, "it appears multiple large transfers were made from your accounts last night to an overseas account. We're seeing transactions totaling $57,000. Overseas." I croaked, my throat dry. "I didn't authorize any transfers." "I understand, sir." This could be fraud. You'll need to file a police report and contact our fraud department immediately. I hung up, my mind spinning. Fraud. The word hit like a punch. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the empty bank page on my screen until I couldn't stand it anymore. I dialed David's number. Dad, what's wrong? He answered, picking up on the first ring. His voice was sharp with concern, probably because I rarely called so early. David, I said, my voice breaking, I think I've been scammed. All my money's gone. Gone? What do you mean gone? He demanded. I told him everything. The call from Microsoft, the antivirus software, the bank details. David listened in silence, and when I finished, he let out a long sigh. Dad, that wasn't Microsoft. Those were scammers. You need to call the police right now. I'm getting in the car. I'll be there in a few hours. I hung up, my hands still trembling. The police. I hadn't dealt with them since a minor fender bender 20 years ago, but I did as David said, dialing the local precinct and explaining what happened. The officer on the phone was polite but distant, telling me to come down to the station to file a report. I grabbed my coat, locked the house, and drove to the Columbus police station, my mind a fog of fear and regret. At the station, I sat across from a tired-looking officer named Reynolds. I recounted the story again, every detail I could remember, the accent, the website, the software. He took notes, but his questions felt routine, like he'd heard this story 100 times before. These scams are tough to crack, Mr. Thompson, he said, leaning back in his chair. Scammers often operate overseas, and without concrete evidence, it's hard to trace them. We'll file the report, but I wouldn't get your hopes up. But it's $57,000, I said, my voice rising. That's everything I have. I understand, sir, he replied, his tone softening but not encouraging. We'll do what we can, but these cases are tricky. Most of the time, the money's gone. I left the station feeling hollow. David arrived that afternoon, his face a mix of worry and frustration. Dad, why didn't you call me before giving them your bank info? He asked, not accusingly but with a kind of helpless exasperation. I thought they were legitimate, I said, staring at the floor. They said they were from Microsoft. David hugged me, something he hadn't done since he was a kid. We're going to fix this, he said firmly. But the police aren't enough. We need professionals. That evening, David searched online and found a private cybersecurity firm based in Cleveland called CyberTrace Solutions. Their website promised expertise in tracking down cybercriminals, even those operating internationally. David called them, and after a brief conversation, they agreed to take my case. They're expensive, David warned, but they've got a good track record. If anyone can find these guys, it's them. For the first time since the scam, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe my money wasn't gone forever. Maybe these scammers, whoever they were, could be found. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let them win without a fight. David and I sat in my living room, the silence heavy between us. The police report was filed, but Officer Reynolds' words echoed in my mind. These cases are tricky. My savings, $57,000, every penny I'd scraped together over decades of work, were gone, vanished into the digital ether. I felt like a fool, an old man who'd let his guard down. But David wasn't ready to give up, and his determination was the only thing keeping me from sinking into despair. CyberTrace Solutions called us back the next morning. Their representative, a woman named Sarah Nguyen, had a calm, no-nonsense voice that put me at ease. Mr. Thompson, she said, we've reviewed the details you provided. These types of scams are sophisticated, but not untraceable. We'll need access to your computer and any communication records you have from the scammers. Can you come to our office in Cleveland? David drove us the 2 hours to Cleveland the following day. The CyberTrace office was sleek, all glass and steel, with young people typing furiously at monitors. Sarah greeted us, a petite woman in her 30s with sharp eyes and a clipboard. She led us to a small conference room and asked me to recount the entire incident again. I went through it all, the call from James, the SecureGuard 360 software, the bank details I'd foolishly handed over. David filled in gaps when my memory faltered, his hand resting on my shoulder. Sarah nodded as she took notes. This sounds like a classic remote access scam, she said. They trick victims into installing software that gives them full control of the computer. From there, they can access files, passwords, even banking apps. The overseas account transfers suggest an international operation, likely India or Eastern Europe, based on the accent and tactics. Can you find them? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. We'll try, Sarah said, her tone measured but confident. Our team specializes in digital forensics. We'll analyze your computer for traces of the malware, track any digital footprints left by the software, and cross-reference with known scam operations. It won't be quick, but we've got a good shot. They kept my computer, promising to return it once their analysis was complete. David paid a hefty retainer, $5,000, which made me wince, but he insisted it was worth it. Dad, this is our best chance, he said as we drove back to Columbus. If they can find these guys, we might get your money back. The next week was agony. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time the phone rang, I jumped, hoping it was Sarah with news. David stayed with me, sleeping on the couch and checking in with CyberTrace daily. On the 8th day, Sarah called. Mr. Thompson, we've made progress, she said. The software you installed was a Trojan, a malicious program designed to steal data. We found encrypted logs in its code that point to a server in Mumbai, India. We've also traced the bank transfers to an account linked to a shell company in Delhi. India, I repeated, the word feeling foreign and distant. So it was the accent. Likely, Sarah said. These operations often use call centers to target victims in the US and Europe. We've identified a pattern matching a known group that's been active for years. They're sloppy, though. They left enough digital breadcrumbs for us to pinpoint their server's physical location. I felt a surge of hope, mixed with anger. These people, sitting halfway across the world, had reached into my life and taken everything. What now? I asked. We're working with international law enforcement contacts to confirm the location, Sarah said. We've also pulled metadata from the software that includes IP addresses and user IDs. It's not enough for an arrest yet, but we're close. We'll keep you updated. David and I spent the next few days researching what could be done. He found a lawyer in Columbus, a man named Richard Heller, who specialized in cybercrime cases. Richard was in his 50s, with a gruff demeanor but a reputation for winning tough cases. We met him at his office, a cluttered space filled with legal books and coffee mugs. I told him the whole story, from the call to CyberTrace findings. He listened intently, jotting notes on a yellow legal pad. This is promising, Richard said, leaning back in his chair. If CyberTrace can confirm the scammer's location and identity, we can file a civil suit. The challenge is jurisdiction. India's legal system isn't exactly cooperative with U.S. claims. But with solid evidence, we can pressure their government or go through international courts. You might even qualify for restitution and damages. Damages? I asked, unfamiliar with the term. Moral distress, financial harm, that sort of thing, Richard explained. You've been through hell, Walter. A judge might award compensation beyond just your stolen money. It sounded too good to be true, but I clung to the possibility. A week later, Sarah called again with the breakthrough we'd been waiting for. We've got them, she said, her voice tinged with excitement. The server in Mumbai is tied to a call center operation run by a group of 5 individuals. We've got names, addresses, even photos from public records. They've been running this scam for at least 3 years, targeting elderly Americans. I sat down hard on my kitchen chair, overwhelmed. You found them? You know who they are? Yes, Sarah said. We're passing the evidence to Interpol and the Indian authorities. We've also prepared a detailed report for your lawyer. This should be enough to move forward with a lawsuit. David and I met with Richard again, this time with the CyberTrace report in hand. It was a thick packet filled with technical jargon I didn't understand. IP logs, server pings, transaction records. But Richard's eyes lit up as he read it. This is gold, he said. With this, we can file a lawsuit in federal court here, citing international fraud. We'll also request cooperation from Indian authorities to freeze their assets. The next step was filing the lawsuit. Richard drafted the papers, naming the 5 individuals identified by CyberTrace. The lead scammer, a man named Vikram Patel, was listed as the mastermind, running a call center that employed dozens of people to make fraudulent calls. The lawsuit demanded the return of my $57,000, plus additional damages for emotional distress and legal fees. Filing the suit felt like a victory, but Richard warned me it was just the beginning. These cases can take months, Even years, he said. But with this evidence, we've got a strong case. And India's been cracking down on these call centers lately, so we might get lucky. I nodded, trying to stay hopeful. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was fighting back. Those scammers had taken my money, my security, my peace of mind. But now, I had names, faces, and a plan. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was Walter Thompson, and I was coming for justice. The weeks following the filing of the lawsuit were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and waiting. My lawyer, Richard Heller, was a bulldog, pushing the case forward with a tenacity that gave me hope. He explained that our lawsuit was filed in a U.S. federal court, citing international fraud and wire theft, with a request for cooperation from Indian authorities through Interpol. The evidence from CyberTrace Solutions was our backbone. Pages of server logs, IP addresses, and transaction records that pinned the scam on Vikram Patel and his 4 accomplices in Mumbai. I clung to those documents like a lifeline, proof that I wasn't just an old fool who'd been tricked. David stayed with me for the first month, working remotely from my living room to keep an eye on me. I could tell he was worried, not just about the money, but about me. I'd lost weight, my appetite gone, and I barely left the house except for meetings with Richard. Every night, I'd lie awake, replaying that call from James. His voice, smooth and convincing despite the accent, haunted me. How could I have been so trusting? I'd always prided myself on being careful, but one phone call had unraveled everything. Richard kept me updated on the case's progress. The Indian authorities, under pressure from recent crackdowns on call center scams, were cooperative. They raided the Mumbai office where Vikram Patel's operation was based, seizing computers and arresting 3 of the 5 named individuals. Vikram and 1 other were still at large, but the evidence was overwhelming. Bank records showed my $57,000 had been funneled through their accounts, split into smaller transfers to hide the trail. They're not masterminds, Richard said during one meeting. They're greedy and careless. That's why we've got them. The court date was set for 6 months after the filing, in a federal courthouse in Columbus. I'd never been part of a lawsuit before, and the idea of standing in front of a judge made my stomach churn. Richard prepared me for what to expect, coaching me on how to tell my story clearly. Just be honest, Walter, he said. The judge will see you're the victim here. The evidence does the rest. When the day arrived, I dressed in my best suit, one I hadn't worn since Ellen's funeral. David drove me to the courthouse, his hand steady on my shoulder as we walked inside. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, with dark wood paneling and a stern-looking judge named Margaret Ellis. Vikram Patel and his accomplices weren't there. They were in India, and their legal representation was a court-appointed lawyer who seemed more interested in paperwork than defending them. Richard presented our case, laying out the CyberTrace report, the bank records, and my testimony. I took the stand, my hands trembling as I swore the oath. I told the judge everything. How I'd trusted the caller, how I'd installed the software, how I'd woken up to find my life savings gone. My voice cracked when I mentioned Ellen, how we'd saved that money together for our retirement, for trips we never got to take. The judge listened intently, her face unreadable, but her eyes kind. When I finished, she asked a few questions about the call and the software, and I answered as best I could. The defense lawyer barely put up a fight. He argued that jurisdiction was unclear since the crime originated in India, but Judge Ellis dismissed that quickly. The harm was done to a U.S. citizen on U.S. soil, she said sharply. This court has every right to act. Closing arguments were brief, and then we waited. The judge deliberated for 2 days, and I spent those days pacing my house, unable to eat or sleep. When Richard called with the verdict, I could hear the smile in his voice. We won, Walter, he said. The judge ruled in your favor. They're ordered to return the $57,000, plus $25,000 in damages for emotional distress and $10,000 for legal fees. The Indian authorities have frozen the scammers' accounts, and Interpol is working to recover the funds. I sank into my chair, tears streaming down my face. We got them, I asked, barely believing it. We got them, Richard confirmed. It'll take time to get the money back. International transfers are slow, but the court's ruling is binding. And Vikram Patel was arrested yesterday in Delhi. They're not getting away with this. David was there when I got the news, and he hugged me so tight I thought my ribs might crack. You did it, Dad, he said. You fought back. The money started coming back in pieces over the next few months. The first transfer was $20,000, then another $15,000, and finally the rest, including the damages. I deposited it all into a new account at a different bank, one with extra security measures David set up for me. The $25,000 for emotional distress felt like a small acknowledgement of the sleepless nights, the shame, the fear that I'd lost everything. But more than the money, it was knowing those scammers were caught that gave me peace. I learned later that Vikram Patel and his crew were part of a larger network, one that had scammed hundreds of people across the US and Canada. The call center was shut down, and several employees faced charges. It wasn't just my victory. It was a blow against an operation that preyed on people like me, people who trusted too easily. I read about other victims in the news, some who'd lost even more than I had, and I felt a pang of gratitude that I'd had David and CyberTrace to help me fight. Looking back, I'm not the same man I was before that call. I'm more cautious now, double-checking every email, every phone number. David installed new security software on my computer, real software, this time, and taught me how to spot scams. I still feel the sting of my mistake, but I also feel stronger, like I've reclaimed something those scammers tried to take. Ellen would have been proud, I think, of how I stood up for myself. The house feels less empty now. I've started gardening again, planting tulips like Ellen used to love. David visits more often, bringing the grandkids, and their laughter fills the rooms. The money's back, but it's the fight that changed me. I was a victim once, but I'm not anymore. I'm Walter Thompson, and I won. If you watched all the way through, drop a comment, smash that like button, and share this video with your friends. I've got more crazy and eye-opening stories coming every week. Maybe even more often if you keep showing support. Scammers need to be held accountable,